Great. We attended a dinner together last night and had a chance to already get a conversation going about some of the things that we'll be talking about now, but this is where we get serious, let's be honest. We did have some levity this morning in the laudatio by Admiral Rob Bauer, which we much appreciated in the ceremony. Actually, I'm going to give this, I don't need this, so I'm going to put this down here. Anyway, let me introduce our panelists. Rob Bauer, Admiral Rob Bauer. He served until just recently as chair of the NATO Military Committee, guiding the Allied strategy through some of the most challenging years since the Cold War, it must be said. Next to him, in the center, forgive me if I'm on the Icelandic names, my Icelandic is still a bit rusty here. Thordis Kolbrun Gylfadottir. Is a member of the Icelandic Parliament, former foreign minister and minister of other things in Iceland in the past, now special envoy for the Council of European Secretary General on the situation of the children of Ukraine. Ben Wallace. Some of you, I'm sure, will recognize Ben, but you've probably been on a panel or two here so far already. He served as the United Kingdom's Secretary of State for Defense, shaping the early stages of Britain's response, military support for Ukraine. So let's get going. As I say, Éric Béranger will not be with us. Now, Ben, first question to you. You oversaw the UK's initial response to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. It was a pretty robust response in comparison to some other countries. What lessons would you say can be drawn from moving fast or moving slow in supporting Ukraine?
Thank you. I think the first lesson is we must look at the world not as we wish it to be, but in the way it is. And right from the start, I spent quite a lot of time, even within the United Kingdom, fighting opposition to arming Ukraine or seeing Putin the way I saw him, which was a view that he was going to invade. He signposted it long before. 2014 was a wake-up call. And I think it was too comfortable for everyone in Europe, including ourselves, just to wish it away and put it in a sideline. So the first thing was always the cultural challenge. And, you know, I remember going to Mariupol when I was the government security minister, not long after the Salisbury poisoning. And I remember when it came to even early military aid to Ukraine, there was a country in Europe that wouldn't even allow diggers to be exported to Ukraine. Diggers, not guns, not missiles, but diggers, because that could have been potentially provocative to President Putin. So I think that was the first battle that we needed to culturally cross. And then the second thing is, once that was happening, to change a sort of mindset that I think has become frighteningly endemic in our foreign ministries around Europe, which is we look at our adversaries as if they are the same as us. We judge them by our own benchmarks. We think they behave like us. I remember one senior member of an intelligence service in Europe saying to me that Putin would invade because it wouldn't be logical. Well, no, it's not logical. By any benchmark, what Putin has done is illogical, disastrous for his own country, and has killed millions of people. But these people aren't always logical. They're not us. They don't have democracies in the same way. They don't have checks and balances that we have. And we have lost that skill, that deep skill that we might have had for the last, hundreds of years ago or 50 years ago, to recognize and read your adversary, read the room. Same for politicians. Read the room. If you can't read the room, don't be in politics, right? If you can't be interested in people, don't be a journalist or a spy, right? So I think it's the same sort of thing when it came to it. So then we had to move to this stage of accepting that Putin was not, what we might think he is, and then doing something about it. And there were a lot of people in this country and in the east of Europe who were warning us for many years, and people were not listening.
Ms. Thordis, you've worked closely on the humanitarian consequences of Russia's war against Ukraine, especially for children. Talk to us about those consequences in relation to hesitation in political and financial support, military support for Ukraine.
Yes, thank you. I mean, my work within the Council of Europe has to do with the situation and well-being of the children of Ukraine that live in the member states. but also the children that live in Ukraine. And then the awful part is the unlawfully abducted or stolen children that Russia has taken from Ukraine inside Russia, where they are many of them are being tracked and located. So we know where many of them are, and they have to be brought back.
Around 1,600, I understand,
have been brought back, yes. And Ukraine has a list down to names of 19,500. But the Yale Humanitarian Research Lab is tracking 35,000 children. And of course, if we just take the whole number of children that live in the temporarily occupied territories, that's 1.6 million. And we do not have the necessary overview or information about their well-being and their situation. And it is a good thing that this is now more talked about, more in the media. And I am thankful for every political leader that raises this, for every media that writes about it. Keith Kellogg has mentioned this more than once here, now, and before. First Lady of in the United States has done so as well. And of course, the First Lady of Ukraine has a big focus on this. This has to have a big political push and a unity. And I think, actually, for politicians, where we're trying to engage with the voters and make them on board with the fact that we need to support Ukraine, I think this is a cause that has a connection to every normal human being who understands how fundamentally wrong and horrible it is to steal other people's children. And this is not a consequence of, being in a war. This is strategic and systematic from the top and down. This is, part of their goal, and we have to recognize that. I agree with Ben when he says, we have to understand that the way of life is just very different. And in that regard, I think we have to be more honest with our peoples when we are discussing what is at stake, because you cannot ask people to trust you if you cannot trust them with the truth.
Well said. Admiral Bauer, I'm going to ask you a more fundamental question. It's a question that is being placed here in the room on multiple levels, but I'm going to put it to you directly. From NATO's perspective, what's at stake in this war for Europe's long-term security, for its credibility, for Europe's long-term security and for its credibility in deterring aggression, NATO being a significant part of Europe?
Well, first and foremost, we know what the ambitions of the Russians are. They sent NATO in December 2021 a concept treaty text, which basically was, we want the buffer zone back. That's on paper. They sent us. And it was discussed basically during the last NATO-Russia Council in January 2022.
Buffer zone.
And the buffer zone was not that they would take necessarily all those nations, but we were not going to be allowed to have NATO troops in those nations. We're talking the three Baltic states, Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, and Bulgaria. And secondly, we would only be allowed to have an exercise for a couple of weeks per year with a brigade-sized force, 4,000 or 5,000 troops. That was the demand from the Russian leadership to NATO.
And that was at a time when Russia still had an observer role within NATO.
No, they were kicked out of the building in 2014.
Okay, this was after that.
After the annexation of Crimea. And so that is basically, we know they have bigger ambitions than Ukraine. Now, if you look very strategically at this, this is about the rules-based international order. This is about, do we accept that a nation, a sovereign state with internationally recognized borders, is being invaded and taken by another nation? And if Russia wins this war, then basically other autocrats and other nations with that kind of idea will think it pays off to do that. It pays off not to adhere to the rules-based international order. So apart from making sure that Ukraine remains a sovereign state, and Ukraine fights, as a lot of people say, for our freedom as well, this is also about this larger system. Now, I'm pretty sure we will see in 5 to 10 years' time, not one world under the UN with one rules-based international order, but we will see two parallel worlds. And one is basically Europe, North America, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, maybe some other nations that live under the rules that we now see as the global rules. And the other part of the world is BRICS or CRINC or other abbreviations of nations. And among them is China, Russia, North Korea, Iran. And so governments, but also businesses now have to think about what does it mean if I have a company, if I have a production facility in those nations? What does it mean judicially? Can I go after my right? They will try to get away from the dollar, from the pound, from the euro. They will talk about rubles and the Chinese currency, etc. So that world is going to come, I'm convinced, and we have to get ready for that.
By the way, there will be questions. We will take questions from you towards the end, at least 10 minutes of questions towards the end. So begin to think about questions and we will get to those too. But I want to give both the panelists an opportunity to respond to what you just said, Admiral. What you've placed on the table is the prospect of two world orders, existing in parallel. Can they coexist peacefully? Would be a separate panel that I would love to do with you on that. But first, I want to give the other two panelists an opportunity to respond to what you just suggested.
No, just on the point on businesses, and I love that my friend Rob Bauer is mentioning that, because I have been, sometimes people in the private sector and businesses, it's different between countries, but overall, the narrative is often, oh, I do business, you do politics. And I try to emphasize and say, well, sorry, fella, that's not the case, especially not now. Because the rule-based international order and the system that the businesses stand on, that foundation to do what they do, that foundation is now being attacked. So businesses can't say, I do business, you do politics. Everyone has a role to play to protect these fundamental rules and that system that was created and is a recipe that works best of all recipes we have tried for each and every individual. So this is a time where, businesses also have to take a stand and be a part of this fight we're in.
We're living in an age of polycrisis, as one likes to say. So many things moving all at once in different directions. There's a sense of confusion. And I'm going to try to pull this conversation back to Ukraine a little bit, the implications of helping Ukraine quickly or hesitating in that and what's at stake. We've already got a sense of what's at stake in the Ukraine war globally. I would like to give you an opportunity, Ben Wallace, to reflect on what's just been put on the table before we move on.
Well, I think the first thing, and exactly as Thordis says, if you want to engage the broader sector, the private sector and everything else, governments need to stop protecting the public from the threat. Right? So in most parts of public policy, the demand signal for it is not owned by the government. In the health system, the nurses, the doctors, the patients, the trade unions, they talk about the demands, what's needed. The pharmaceutical companies will tell you what's needed. But actually, uniquely, national security threats are pretty much owned by the state. We protect the public under secrecy. We don't tell them all the time what's going on, partly to protect intelligence, but also we shield them. And it also allows the politicians of the day to not have to make difficult decisions. Right? I'll give you an example. Most NATO countries have their ammunition stocks as classified as secret. Now, they're quite a logical thing. You don't want your enemies to know you haven't got any hand grenades left or something. But actually, if the public knew what many of our statuses or readiness levels were or our ammunition stocks, the parliaments and the public would be outraged. So it's very convenient that everything is classified in the national security space. If we don't tell you that, let's say, the Russians have hacked Ministry A or Ministry B or attacked the Icelandic bank, as an example, that hasn't, but if it had, then you won't get anxious and you won't demand I do something about it, and also you won't demand that I might have to cut something else in public policy that will make me unpopular and therefore spend it on our own national security. And I think that is something we have to level with the public about, we have to be honest about, we have to tell them. You know, we see it on the China policy in Europe. We're all a bit uneasy about leveling with the European and the British public quite what China gets up to, because that might mean there's some awkward questions. We can't carry on making things in China or whatever. So I think that's the first thing, is to engage the public across the whole horizon of security, private sector, public sector, military sector. It's all got to be on the same plan, on the same wavelength, and understand why we're doing it. In early military training in Britain, you're always taught the best test of leadership is, can you answer the question, what is my higher commander's mission and my role in it? So when you go on an inspection, if the most junior soldier can't answer those two questions, the leadership has failed. And if you want to make your state resilient and robust, we all need to understand we have a role to play in that resilience and necessarily deterrence. And we're not anywhere near there yet. Some of our friends in Scandinavia are. I saw a Swedish leaflet a few months ago, absolutely brilliant, about what to do in time of sort of war or whatever. I think Britain last published a leaflet like that in 1990, I should think. So we've got more to do.
Coming back to Ukraine, hesitation or not hesitation, more urgency. Admiral Bauer, I live in Germany, which was famously hesitant at the beginning after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. It offered helmets, right? Some helmets for the Ukrainian military that was clearly being completely attacked by the Russian army with its full force, and managed to push it back. This was an embarrassment for Germany. Germany changed its stance, but there's still hesitancy. The bus I got on to go to the airport in Germany the day before yesterday there was a poster on the bus stop saying "Not our war," calling for people to join a protest against the war, any kind of war, including defending Ukraine. I want to ask you on the hesitation question, how do you see the reasons for the hesitancy then, and how do we break through that now in giving Ukraine what it needs to win this war, given what you described is at stake?
I can't speak for the German people because I'm Dutch, but...
Nor can I.
I mean, one of the things every time you meet German politicians, even military leaders, is there is some way deep down in their mind this feeling of guilt that what happened in the Second World War.
Of course.
And even towards Russia.
I don't want to make this only about Germany. I'm just talking about more
so
broadly
they feel guilty about what their ancestors did, and then there is also a certain guilt towards the Russians, to what they did to the Russians then. So I think that is part of the reason why maybe the German people responded the way they responded for so long. But as Ben Wallace said, we've been living for far too long in an era where we wanted to believe the world to be something where actually the world had changed and wasn't like that. And it is the inconvenient truth in many ways. So we believed, which is basically the idea of the EU, if you have mutual economic relationships, you will never have war again. That's the idea of the EU. And so we cannot, or at least could not, and we should by now, but we could not believe that if you have an economic relationship with Russia, where they sell a lot of gas and oil to us, and we made ourselves far too dependent on them, by the way, we couldn't believe they were stupid enough to start a war. Because a war damages your economy. And Putin couldn't care less, because he had bigger ideas than that. Now, the same problem we had with the Russians for 20 years, when people said, no, we can't be too unnice to them because of the gas and the oil. We can't. We are doing exactly the same now with China. We are completely dependent on all the raw materials for renewable energy. If we go there in 2035, and Xi does what Putin did in 2022, he closes the valve of those raw materials, we will not have light, no heating, we will not drive, and we will have no production at all. So we have to stop being naive. The world is not always a nice place, and we have to come and go after our interests as well.
But do you see that happening now? I mean, we seem to have been disabused now of the notion that history ended in 1990, right? The penny has finally dropped, right? You think perhaps not? Okay.
No, I think not. For Putin, yes. For Xi, no. Okay. Honestly. Okay. And I'm not against China, don't get me wrong, but we are completely dependent in ways that is unacceptable.
Good enough. Very well. Again, I'm loving this conversation, but I keep feeling other conversations coming out of it that I would love to pursue on this topic. In any case, would you like to, add something? Iceland is a special case, right? This is when you look at Europe, it's not formally part of the European Union. It's a pretty small country, to be honest, but it still exists as part of Europe, very much so, and it looks at what's happening. You look at what's happening in Ukraine from your perspective, dealing with humanitarian issues, and particularly for being an advocate for the children of Ukraine. How do you see this moving? Are we moving more decisively with greater urgency towards addressing these issues that would also relieve the humanitarian suffering that is going on now in response to this invasion?
Yes, we're moving in the right direction, but we're still moving too slow.
And how do we get that urgency in there?
Well, I agree with Ben when he talks about the engagement with our peoples, and I think there we are just not being honest enough. And I agree with Rob when he says, when the history ended, that was with regards to Russia or the Soviet Union. It's different. We all say de-risking, decoupling, with regards to China, but what are we actually doing? So the lessons learned on history is more on the Russian side. And I actually think that, when we all say now we should have listened to the Baltic states, we should have listened to Poland, and they are, polite enough to not scream at us, we told you so. But if we mean it, that when we say we should have listened and we've learned, that actually means that we have to continue to listen when they, start to speak about uncomfortable things. And that is what I'm seeing now. We don't. It's really easy to say back in time, oh, we should have listened, we've learned from that. But then as soon as things become uncomfortable again, the tendency is always, oh, we have a bigger picture here to think about. Our responsibility, not from Iceland, obviously, but the bigger countries, would say we have a, bigger responsibility. We have the bigger context to think about. I'm sorry for your experience, but you're being a bit paranoid. We need some time. We take it in steps. But I'm afraid that we do not have that time. So we have to move faster. And I am confident that we can do it. Europe has what it takes to do it. But it's a different question when you ask, are you sure that we will, within the time that we have? And I think when we talk about when we talk about the support for Ukraine, I would like to say that we should maybe just don't talk as much about support for Ukraine and just call it what it is. It is a Russia tax. Russia has put a tax on Europe, and we just have to pay for it. It's not, if Russia wasn't out of control, we would not have to be, doing what we're doing. So maybe that's one of the honest conversation that we have with our publics. It's not only about, doing what is right and supporting Ukraine. Ukraine is in need. It's a Russia tax. It's because of their behavior that we have to pay that tax. And also when we talk about the values and we're fighting for the values, and sometimes, at least in my case, people get kind of tired of, yeah, you there with your values. It is a matter of way of life. And what does Russia have to offer? There are so many people in that country that doesn't even have toilets. Maybe we should just say that. That's not, a country and a society that is, you know, very good to be in. There's no, I mean, there's not gas at their gas stations. I mean, this is what it's really about eventually. So I think we just have to speak more frank, because both people deserve it, and I think when you speak with them frank and honestly, that's what you get in return.
Thank you. Also echoing what Ben Wallace already laid out in terms of the importance of being level with your publics to a degree about what's going on and what's at stake, which we've discussed. You know, this particular panel is framed as, you know, the costs of hesitation, but I would rather turn it around and say, what are the incentives for accelerating and stepping up support for Ukraine? We already had the idea put on the table of what's at stake here. There's a lot at stake, and I think we're beginning to get that. I saw you kind of shaking your head about whether people really have grasped, you know, what's going on. Ben Wallace, would you care?
Well, I'm afraid to say, if I were to predict where we are in 4 years' time, and of course we want peace in Ukraine, but if peace happens, I suspect I can hear the tingling in all the finance ministries across Europe thinking, oh, good, we can get back to normal. We don't really have to see through all these defense spending promises and difficult decisions. And let's be really frank here. There are very few countries actually right now spending more money on defense, despite all the words. There's Germany, there's Poland, there's the Baltics, and there's Scandinavia, right? Britain and France and Italy and Spain, we're not really going to spend any real new money for another 3-4 years, right? Not towards the end of our electoral cycle. There's a lot of what we call tucking under of treasury figures, artificially using NATO definitions, sales tax receipts, and all that bollocks, excuse my language, but it is total nonsense in the way that we kid ourselves, right? We're not kidding the enemy, we're not kidding anyone else. And I just already hear those little violins in the finance ministries hoping, praying that there's a peace deal at any cost so that they can get back to normal and do what they've been doing to defense budgets across Europe for 30, 40 years, which is corporate raiding our budgets to fund other social budgets, which, to be fair to the United States, has been a genuine angst for many years, whether it was under President Obama or President Trump, that we have been not stepping up in our defense budget in order to fund a different lifestyle. And I think that is why I'm a bit of a cynic about the direction of travel, and I haven't seen any of that behavior really change apart from a very few countries. And I think we should be honest again about that. And for those of us in the room who believe it's important that Russia isn't going to go away anytime soon and the challenge to our values, we should be campaigning always, no matter what the color of the government is, to make sure that they spend what's appropriate.
Russia isn't going away. Indeed, it's expanding its provocations in Europe. Its cyber war against European Union states and other states, including the United States, is being ramped up and is becoming more and more sophisticated, and it's coming at greater cost. Admiral Bauer, what practical steps would you say could be taken now you can define that however you like, but in procurement, in regulation, in cooperation within Europe and NATO countries, could be taken to deliver what Ukraine needs in order to win this war as quickly as possible? I'm thinking about a conversation that I had with a NATO Secretary General a few weeks ago, where when I put all of this, you know, how do we make the war end? And he said, it's not diplomacy. Russia has no intention of stopping. It is give Ukraine all the weapons, the means it needs to defeat Russia now. What would you say could be done now to accelerate things in the right direction?
In a way, what happened in Poland and in Estonia and in Denmark is good news. Because it shows that the support to Ukraine hurts Russia. Otherwise, they wouldn't do this. It's particularly interesting because Poland, Estonia, and Denmark are the three nations that have supported Ukraine so strongly over the last 3.5 years. So this is not just a test to see how we respond, whether we respond, and how we respond. This is also to scare our citizens and to have to start a debate within our nations to say, hey, we shouldn't give away weapons to Ukraine because we actually need those weapons at home because of the rising threat. You see all these drones. Now, we have to sort of, I understand the anxiety that comes with the drones entering NATO airspace. But at the same time, we will have to say time and time again, every time an incident happens, is this really a threat? Other than that it is not good and that it is a violation of airspace and all that. But is there a military threat? Is this the start of the war? Question mark.
And NATO assessed that it was not.
Exactly. And so every time this happens, you have to respond in a way that is appropriate. And the nations themselves that are involved have a role to play. So they can make a decision on their own, as Poland did when shooting down the drones. And that's fine. It's good. But if you don't shoot down a drone, like in Denmark, it doesn't mean the armed forces there didn't do anything. There was a choice not to shoot it down. So every time we have this debate about what is happening to us, we should also think about it every time this happens, because you can only start a war once. And that's something we have to keep in mind. So I'm not afraid of starting the war if it's necessary, but you can only start it once.
I'm going to, unless you really want to come in, go ahead.
I will be very short.
And then I'm going to open up the floor.
Very short, just on that point, because it's also important for countries that are further away from Ukraine and Russia to understand the fact that, you know, there are 3 wars going on. I mean, it's the war, it's political war and information war. And with regards to the drones in Poland, I mean, we saw the biggest information war attack on Poland that we've seen for years, like half an hour before they came. So it's definitely part of, you know, the attacks. And you can't, you know, we have to be vaccinated against that. And we have to understand that that is also what is happening. And that would, you know, make us more resilient as societies to understand that.
And Wallace.
I'm going to slightly disagree, Rob, about starting a war. Because it's only because Putin tells us we're going to start a war that we fear we are. Turkey shot down a Russian fighter, didn't start a war. I put in storm shadows into Ukraine, despite Putin's constant threats. If we put tanks into Ukraine, there would be a war. If Poland refurbished MiG-29s, we'd start a war. You know, Putin has been allowed to set the terms all the way through, even though it becomes blatantly obvious that his red lines are drawn in chalk, not permanent pen. So, of course, we have to use our judgment about whether this really would start a war or not. But he seems to still be telling us, and I think that's why Germany, despite an opposition, the Chancellor saying he put in Taurus, he's not putting in Taurus. We put in Storm Shadow, the French put in Scalp. I'm still waiting for the so-called big Russian response, because he is a bully, and he is a coward, and he knows if you stand up to him, actually, first of all, he doesn't have much of an army left, right? Let's look at that on paper. Yes, he's got navy and nuclear weapons and air forces, but he is not as powerful as he may think. His armed forces are not as skilled as he thought, and I don't think he's going to risk a war over someone shooting down his drone, for example. And I think we just have to be really careful that we don't let the bully constantly set the terms or the red lines, which time and time again are tested. And I remember, I'll give you the best example of that. I remember quite early on in this, the Danish decided they were going to support Ukraine. And the Russian foreign minister said something, and the ambassador in Copenhagen said something very aggressive. And I think the Danish foreign minister summoned the Russian ambassador and said, thanks very much, but we're part of NATO, we're bigger than you, thank you very much, and I do run along, right? And reminded them, this small country of Copenhagen, of Denmark, reminded them that we are bigger as an alliance, and no one's going to bully us, least of all a Russia with an economy about half the size of Britain.
Thank you. I'm going to open the floor now to questions. I see already someone there with a microphone standing by. I suspect there's someone on that side as well. Yes, and I see multiple hands. We'll start here towards the front. We'll begin right there where we have a question, and I'll take 2 more, and then we'll go to answers. Please just mention your name and direct your question and keep it short and sharp.
I'm not a sir. I'm Tamar Jacoby, Progressive Policy Institute in Washington. I'm going to repeat your question and underline it. I don't think we got an answer. I'd like to hear from each of the panelists something that they, maybe even 2 or 3 things, that the West could do now to accelerate things in Ukraine. I mean, I live in Kyiv, and the Ukrainians have the sense that they really are fighting alone, despite a lot of weaponry and a lot of help, a lot of budgetary support. What can be done to accelerate things and get us toward a conclusion?
This, okay, we'll keep that in your bonnet there, Ben Wallace. We'll come to that in a second. I'm going to take 2 more questions. First, in the second row, the gentleman there, and then here in the third row. We'll collect these 3 questions, and then we'll go to answers. Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Alexandru Banda. I'm from Romania, and my question for all the panelists: what do you consider should be the role of the eastern flank of NATO, especially of Romania, because of its vicinity with the Black Sea, for assuring a long-lasting peace after the war in Ukraine? Thank you.
Thank you. And here. Yep.
Hi. Thank you for taking my question. My name is Sean Nodley. I'm a visiting fellow at the Danube Institute based in Budapest. My question is this: yes, we have the ability to shoot down these drones and to take out, fighter jets the way Turkey did, and it did not start a war. My primary concern is if we're shooting down a $500 to $1,500 drone using a $500,000 Sidewinder missile, isn't Russia just going to degrade our capabilities to defend ourselves over time? Are they just playing the long game here? And how can we make it more economical to fight back?
Great. Excellent. So we've got 3 questions on the table. I don't think I need to recap them unless you need. Ben had already you've given us a signal that you want to answer the first one, and then we'll move on to the others.
I can do all 3 in a minute.
So okay, go for it.
First of all, I think what we have to remember is what motivates Putin. Putin is in love with the idea of dominating Ukraine, taking Ukraine. Crimea is Russia, and Russia is Crimea, he announced in 2014. If you read his speeches of 2014, he compares Crimea to the Holy Mount. So we have to help Ukraine have the long-range capabilities to make Crimea unviable. We need to choke the life out of Crimea, and I think if we do that, I think Putin will realize he's got something to lose. If it is not inhabitable or not possible for it to function, and that bridge, we need Thordis in from Germany, we need to smash the cursed bridge, because that's an ego, that's a statue to Putin's ego, and I think if we do that, Putin will suddenly realize he's got something to lose. I think that's the first one. Romania, what I think the countries on the eastern flank can do, actually, with military backup of NATO, I think you can be a success. I think you can be the more economically successful and flourishing democracies you can be. You can send the strongest signal to Russia that the best way for your future is a European way and not a Russian way. That's the best message for Moldovians and everything else. Do you really want to live in a Putin Russia, or do you want to live the European way? And I think that is the best. That's the thing he hates most. It's what he's at war with, is our values and our life and our economic success and all of that. And I actually think for those countries, and I don't think that's the case for Romania, but I would say Hungary is playing the wrong game. Hungary will encourage people to think that somehow the grass is greener in the Russian sphere, and it isn't. To that. And thirdly, the point about shooting down, you're absolutely right. Why have we been ignoring the new ways of warfare lessons for the last 3 years? Why are our military still wanting to buy aircraft carriers and $1 million missiles? Each of us in our countries have amazing companies and tech companies producing anti-drone solutions and drones and everything else, and we are still ignoring them, and we're still buying big tanks and big aircraft and big warships. The lessons are there, and we seem to still be buying yesterday's equipment for yesterday's war. So that's the only thing that exposes. Of course, each commander will make his decision at the moment about whether he's going to fire a missile for $1 million. But ultimately, if that doesn't remind us we need to invest in some new capability, then I don't know what is.
Thank you, Ben, for addressing all 3. You went a little over your 1 minute, pronounced time limit, but you did well. Other responses from the panel? You're not obliged to answer all 3 questions, just parts, please.
I will not answer all of the 3 questions. Ben basically answered all of them. I just wanted to add on what we can do. I mean, the screaming frozen asset thing has to be solved. And that's something that Europe can do without asking the United States of America and would, be a game changer. And is solvable with legal advice and political will. On EU membership as well. That is also something that, and I understand that I come from a country that's not part of the European Union, but Ukraine wants to join. Same goes with Moldova because it was mentioned. They win elections again and again after fighting for that future, and it has to be delivered upon. And the same goes with Ukraine. And it's absolutely correct what Ben says, that what truly frightens Putin is the fundamental values that Ukraine is ready to die for each and every day, to be the society that they have already chosen to be and become. That is what frightens him. He can't admit it, but that is what he cannot stand. And we can do a lot to assist them in getting there. And of course, they need the defense support to reach that.
Honorable
Bauer. A lot of people talk about the frontline states, and that's basically Eastern Europe. But we have to get away from that, because in modern warfare, there's a lot of things where there is actually no front anymore. So the people in Portugal and the people in Spain and Italy, the Netherlands, UK, all the nations that are a little bit further away from the Eastern Front should actually understand that there is no front line with cyber, with hypersonic missiles, with space, in the information domain. We are at war when it comes to cyber. We are at war in the information domain. We are. And it doesn't mean there's tanks in the streets of London or tanks in the streets of The Hague or in Rome or in Lisbon, but we are in a war. And so I would suggest, as Ben said, this is the reason why Ukraine was attacked is to fight against democracy. That is what Putin is fighting. Because if the people in Ukraine will have the ability to check their governments, to fight fraud and all these things, then the people in Russia might want that too. And that is very dangerous for him. And to your question on the 600,000 euro AMRAAM missile against a 20,000 euro drone. Of course, that's not something we can continue to do. But the military commander is fighting with what he has. That's one. Second, we have started a discussion about finding a better balance between high-end, expensive, long-to-build, very high-tech things like the F-35 aircraft carriers, nuclear submarines, that we still need, by the way. And lower or cheaper answers in larger numbers to fight things like the drones. I'm convinced we can solve this problem. We're 50% of the world's economy and 50% of the world's military might. If we cannot solve this problem, we should be ashamed of ourselves. But then the industry and the military need to work together in a different way than we have allowed them to do. So this is also about ministries of finance that actually have to accept that the world has changed and that it is about partnerships and that it is about doing business in a different way. So yes, we need to change this. I disagree with Ben when he says that we're still wanting to buy the old type weapons. That's not the case, but we need different ways of being able to do that.
Thank you very much. Now we have a bit of a problem. We have 2 minutes left. So if you're going to raise your hand, I'm going to ask you to make your question really sharp and short, and I'll take three questions. I'll try to take 3 very quickly. 1, 2, 3. Starting right here. I have to end on time, by the way.
All right, real quick. Name is Frederick Johnson. I'm the ambassador of Iceland to Poland and incidentally also to Ukraine. Today is day 1,315 of the special military operation. In 103 days, we will be at 1,418, which is incidentally how long the so-called Great Patriotic War lasted. We all admire the Ukrainians for the resilience for more than 3.5 years. But really, if we are their friends and allies, what is our failure? Is this a failure of political leadership? Is this a failure of military leadership? Or, being an ambassador, a failure of diplomacy?
Thank you. Yes, sir. Very quickly.
Very quickly, thank you. Offensive versus defensive capabilities within NATO. We've talked a lot about defensive capabilities, ground-based air defense, defense against drones. There's a natural requirement to preserve our populations, but how much should we have an offensive capability in NATO to hold our enemy at risk? Thank you.
I'm going to have to stop it there, and we'll get quick responses from the panel, whoever wishes to respond in the next 48 seconds.
Yeah, so offensive weapons, yes. The good news is NATO, all the allies have agreed to buy deep precision strike weapons, which is necessary to basically kill the archer and not just to respond to the arrows. So that is something that NATO is now going to get on top of what only the US and maybe some other nations had. So we need more of that, and that choice has been made in The Hague when it comes to the capability targets. So that is one. And when it comes to the failure, I think in many ways we have been naive in all domains. And I think the world is hopefully woken up. And it will not end with Ukraine. It will not end with the war between Ukraine and Russia. As Ben said, the ministers of finance want to bring back the normal. The new normal is that we will see the power balancing act between the US and China for the next 5 to 10 years, or 15 years. That is what will drive the world when it comes to security.
I'm afraid we are out of time. The clock has turned red, and I need to stop this now, but this has been an excellent conversation. A warm round of applause for our panelists, and thank you all for being with us today.